Good morning, everybody. I'm Jeremiah Bentley. I'm the co-host of Moon Tower Soccer Podcast, which is the Striker Texas Austin FC podcast. I'm not going to be here to talk to you about Austin FC this morning. Our topic this morning is how do you grieve a soccer team? Why do they come and go? The number of soccer teams in the United States is expanding, but growth isn't always linear. Franchises come and go for different reasons, leaving years of memories, memorabilia, and dedicated fan bases in their wake. Who love them reveal what place these teams have in their hearts and still hold in the communities they call home. And I'm happy to be joined by three panelists for this conversation today. First is Jeremy Alumbaugh. He's a soccer lifer. In 2014, he moved from the youth level at St. Louis to become the vice president of St. Louis FC in the USL Championship. He was responsible for day-to-day technical side of the club, from the academy to the first team, while also serving on the executive team. In December of 2019, he joined Chattanooga FC as their managing director as the club transitioned from the amateur ranks to a professional third division club participating in the National Independent Soccer Association. Will be Djorn Buckholz, who's a familiar name to many of you who have followed the Austin soccer scene for a long time. Djorn spent the last 20 years in upper management and professional soccer in the USL and MLS. Since 2017, Djorn has been the executive director of the National Soccer Hall of Fame based in Frisco, Texas. And our third panelist is Lara. Cindy is a writer at the SB Nation site, The Blue Testament, covering Kansas City, the Kansas City Current, NWSL Media Association member. She was formerly with the RSL Soapbox from 2017 to 2020, Utah Royals FC. So thank you all very much for joining us this morning. Looking forward to this conversation and hearing what y'all have to say for fans who are experiencing a little bit of loss and memory during time from their own professional franchises in the region. So let's just start it off. We'll go a little bit around the room, and we'll start with Jeremy. Talk about your soccer story, how you came to the game, how you got involved in soccer operations.
Yeah, sure. I don't know how far back you want to go, but, grew up playing the game, was fortunate enough to grow up in a very small town where there was no American football, which for everybody in Texas, I know probably sounds really, really weird, but grew up, soccer was the sport. So from there, it just became, part of the daily life and passion, playing to collegiate level, moving on to coaching, different ranks. And I was always pretty fortunate that the clubs I was working at and the universities I was working at were also heavily focused on the business side of things, allowing the club to do things in the community that it couldn't do if it didn't have a sorted out business structure. So from there, kind of naturally made the transition from the coaching side, a little bit into administration and operations. And then, as you said, fully joining the other side of the soccer side and the business side in 2014 in St. Louis with St. Louis FC. And just really excited to be here today to talk about a difficult subject, but obviously something that's reality in the U.S. and something that needs to be discussed.
All right, thank you for that brief, and we'll get into the details of all those things. How about you, Djorn? What's your background in soccer?
Yeah, well, I'm originally from Nebraska, a little bit opposed to Jeremy. I am from a state where American football is the sport of choice, but I grew up in a small town, Hastings, Nebraska. My dad started the soccer program at the YMCA, so I grew up playing it, played it in high school, college, ended up getting my first job out of college as a director of operations and media at the Indiana Blast, of the old A-League, back in the early 2000s, and just kind of got lucky enough to keep continuing on from there in Minnesota, Austin, Sporting Kansas City, Louisville, Kentucky, back to Austin again, and now here in Frisco, Texas, as executive director of the National Soccer Hall of Fame. And I have moved around a lot. I think that's why, I probably got invited to this panel, because a lot of the teams, the reason I had to move around a lot is teams were coming and going, and it was about the next opportunity and making sure that we left things right in communities where unfortunately a team went away or had a natural disaster. And I'm sure we're going to get into all of that kind of stuff in a little bit, but just been lucky to work in it for the last 20 years.
Yeah, I know. I was stalking you on LinkedIn this morning and noticed the long history there. So it's definitely appreciate having you there, and the work you're doing at the National Soccer Hall of Fame. How about you, Cindy?
Yeah, I grew up playing soccer, and then I think it was more in my adult years where I really got into truly following it, and started covering the NWSL in 2017. So that was like, what, 5 years ago now? And there was a team in Kansas City that I discovered, and this was after the success of the U.S. women's national team at the World Cup in Canada. And so that kind of began the interest in covering the team, and with a team nearby in Kansas City that allowed me to cover FC Kansas City. And so I feel like I've experienced losing a team both ways, where you cover FC Kansas City for a few months and then they fold. They go to Utah, you embrace that community, and then they fold as well, and then a return again to Kansas City. So I feel like I've experienced losing a team twice, and that's not always been very enjoyable. So yeah.
Well, so let's get into that a little bit with you, Cindy. Since you've gone through it twice, I could start with Kansas City. Like, what was that journey like, and what were your lessons maybe that you learned there, and then we'll talk about Utah too.
Yeah, so with FC Kansas City, like I said, it was fairly new, and I was getting into getting to covering the team. I was young, obviously, as far as like covering. I didn't have a resume, just got into it because there was a need to cover women's soccer, specifically in Kansas City, where there is the success of Sporting Kansas City. But for some reason, the women's team was not as highly attended as the men's. And there was just such a need for it at that time, and it was needed. And so again, fairly new, and to me, going to the FC Kansas City, I thought I was going to Children's Mercy Park for the first game that I was going to cover, and it ended up being at Swope Soccer Village, which was a huge shock. And there I kind of noticed that, hey, women's soccer is not on par with men's soccer in Kansas City. So that was like an interesting situation where I could see that attendance was dwindling. They weren't in such a great stadium, and of course they were a very successful team at the same time. They had won the 2014 NWSL Championship and also the 2015 NWSL Championship. So for a highly successful NWSL team to not have the coverage that the men's team did, that really stuck out to me. And so it was an interesting journey because I could see that this team was a little bit in trouble with just noticing how the attendance and where they were located too was a factor.
And Djorn, does any of that resonate with you? I think probably the success of the club, and maybe the success off the field, not necessarily aligning with each other as much. I think it's probably something we experienced here too.
Yeah, I mean, that can happen. Austin, I think, has got kind of two different stories about what happened to, both versions of the Austin Aztecs. I was at the Minnesota Thunder, back in, what was it, 2009. I'd been there for 6 years. And, we were in a similar situation where, there was an ownership group that was foreign based that I don't think was vetted as well as it probably should have been. I think at that time, you think about soccer in the country at that time, especially in the minor league second division, there was a lot of feuding, right? There was the USL trying to make second division soccer what it was going to be. And there was the NASL trying to do the same thing. And, there were a lot of butting heads. And I think, there were leagues trying to figure out, okay, how do we make sure we have enough teams? How do we make sure we got the right ownership groups? And I don't think that always married all the time. Minnesota, like I said, I left there, a team that was just in really rough shape and trying to get under itself. It's no secret. It's been said, it's been printed in newspaper articles that I actually personally paid for our team to go to our last match that year in Puerto Rico. And never saw a dime of that money back, right? Because, it was just a messed up ownership group. So I ended up coming to Austin Aztecs. We had a great season in 2010, but, a reason the team left is, the ownership group at that time didn't necessarily think that, Austin was a Major League Soccer city. I think we've proved that wrong now, but they moved to Orlando, right? And you know what? Good for them. They had a great situation in Orlando, became a Major League Soccer team and very successful. And, I got lucky enough in 2015 to come back and work with Roberto, who was in charge of the Striker Texas, brought me back in at the second version of the Austin Aztecs. Had a great season playing at House Park in downtown Austin. Next thing you know, I think it was Memorial Day or something, Labor Day. Our stadium was 6 feet underwater from basically a giant flood that happened, and it displaced the team to Round Rock, and I just don't think things really recovered from there. So really, a variety of reasons, why they can go, whether it's ownership groups, natural disasters, but it's never a fun thing. to be a part of, and you feel bad for the fans. You feel bad for yourself personally as well, on just trying to figure out how to make the right situation. And I'm happy with what has happened in Austin, for an ownership group to come back around and really make the investment to bring Major League Soccer to Austin, which I think is exactly what it needed.
Yeah, Jeremy, you've got a little bit different of a story in St. Louis. Why don't you share that one?
Yeah, so St. Louis has obviously been a unique soccer history and place in the landscape of the game here in the States, and a lot of history. But one of the things that St. Louis had always struggled with was being successful and truly supporting the outdoor game. The indoor game, professional game, has been around forever and has been pretty consistent, but there was always since the Stars in the late 70s went away, was kind of one and dones a little bit. So St. Louis FC started pretty plain and simple. St. Louis Scott Gallagher was or is a very successful youth club, and had a facility, still has a facility. Was the St. Louis Soccer Park at the time, now Worldwide Technology Soccer Park, that was perfect for a lower level professional soccer club. And so we received a call from an agent, a broker, somebody trying to look at perhaps bringing a team in, and they wanted to simply rent the stadium and the facility. And what that made us do is take a hard look and see, okay, if outdoor soccer failed to get in St. Louis, our club, our youth club, was going to be, kind of in the same boat with them and be probably viewed as a guilty party, even if we were just renting the facility. So it really forced us to say, okay, does our community need this? Does our community need something to kind of, to attach to and to grow? And St. Louis was becoming a changing market in terms of the type of people that were moving there and the type of businesses. And at the same time, you had USL, as Djorn just talked about, Orlando City starting to pop, and then Sacramento right before that was a big one. And even in the NASL just down the road from us was Indy 11 and all the success that Peter Wilt and those guys brought. So we kind of started to get the buzz that if we wanted to keep up with these other cities, that professional soccer was not only something that our club needed to have something at the top of the youth pyramid, but our community needed as well. So we were a professional club owned by a 501c3, so we didn't have a true ownership group or anything like that. It was being done by us, and provided some unique challenges, and then quickly got into it and things kind of took off. And then as that started to happen, the MLS vibe came around and a stadium thing that we were heavily involved with, trying to push that. The vote didn't happen, and kind of thought the MLS thing was going to drift away. And then it came back a little bit later from there. But just a unique situation. And and then when the second iteration of the MLS piece came around, which was heavily locally through the Taylor family that owns Enterprise Rent-A-Car, and they've gotten that thing off to a great start so far, and a beautiful stadium downtown and all of that. There were conversations that the existing USL club, St. Louis FC, was going to be a part of that, and perhaps a youth model rolled up, and then things change, which often happens when you get into projects and you realize you want to put your own stamp on it. So from then it was like, okay, is this little 501c3 going to be able to maintain, a team at the USL Championship level? Do they look to drop down maybe to League One or other options or what have you? And then so as those conversations were going on, a lot of changes and a lot of things started to occur. And I wasn't there officially when they closed the doors, as I'd taken this position here in Chattanooga, but watching it from a distance, but also being really entrenched with friends and people that were working at the club and the supporters group, felt like you were there in the trenches. And yeah, it was a tough day when that finally came out publicly that they weren't going to move ahead. And obviously COVID was somewhere in between there and all that. So it was truly a unique situation in St. Louis.
Yeah, I think the lower league thing is interesting. Djorn, do you want to add on to that? I mean, you talked a little bit about the competition sort of among the leagues. And do you think that complicates this issue where there's teams that are competing with each other in different leagues that are competing with each other, and is that part of so much turnover in terms of ownership and franchise movement?
Yeah, I think it has. I mean, for me, just in my experience, it was much more prominent, really in that late 2000s to maybe 2014. With the USL and the NASL, it was a battle. It was a battle for territory. I mean, I remember sitting on, I'd gotten done working Copa America in 2016, just a side project, and I was sitting on a beach in Florida, and I got a phone call from the NASL asking if I could get to Oklahoma City very quickly to go help out Rio OKC, which was owned by, Rio Vallecano, who was having issues, ownership issues, and that was an example at the time. You also had the OKC Energy in the same market, and to think that a city like Oklahoma City could support a USL team and an NASL team, that just was indicative of the battle that was happening, at that point. So I think that has loosened a bit. I think U.S. Soccer's done a good job of going, okay, here are our tiers. You got Division I Major League Soccer. Here's Division II, Division III that Germany's involved in, but that's all become much more professionalized, which I think was the point that it needed to get to. I talk about my experience in Minnesota, in 2009. That was a battle of territory again, and maybe the appropriate vetting of ownership group wasn't done. Every ownership group's got to put down a letter of credit, in actual money. And I'm not confident that ever happened in Minnesota, because, people like me had to go out and buy plane tickets for a team to go to their final game, So I think the professionalism over the last decade has improved, that I think has minimized, some of that, and a big reasons why teams were coming out, because they were coming in and out very frequently at that time. And I think you're seeing it less and less, but it is still happening. And I think it's just a nature of the business. And, the last 18 months, almost 2 years now, has certainly not helped with COVID. Inside the National Soccer Hall of Fame, I have a giant map of professional soccer in the United States. And over the last, 2 years, I've had to change that less, which is nice. With the first few years, there was a lot of logos coming in and out on that giant soccer map. And I'm just glad to see it's becoming more professional. Soccer in this country is becoming more professional, and that's just not on the field, but also in the front office and from a management standpoint as well. And I think that's only going to help the situations of teams coming and going.
Yeah, you hit on. I think we have to talk about the pandemic, right? Because it's the thing that's been, on across every business, for the last 2 years. And with this sport being one that's more dependent on game day revenue and gate than any other, I feel like it's the hardest hit by it. So I'd love to hear from each of you kind of what your observations have been about how the pandemic's affected your clubs you follow, the clubs you're with, just your interest in the sport in general. But I think that's something that we probably should address.
Yeah, I'll jump in there. I think, the one thing that the pandemic has, really focused is, I think, groups that are coming in are having to take a harder look, whether that's postponing, which we saw in MLS, right? A couple of clubs coming in got pushed back a year, or at the lower leagues where, some announced expansion or opportunities up and down, I guess it's a pyramid, up and down, have been postponed, or people are kind of sitting back, because I think it's, this is not for the soft. This is a very difficult business, and you throw it in on top of a pandemic, it's even more difficult. I think it'll be interesting to see some of the growth at see what Charlotte does this year coming into it. What lessons have they been prepared for and learned? Same thing with the NWSL, with the new clubs coming in there, and then within USL and NISA too. But I think what it's done for us is it's also taken us to take a really hard look at our revenue lines, and where else can we draw revenue that's not just game day dependent, because a lot of lower clubs, I think they get in, and ownership groups, whether they've been vetted well or not, they get in and go, oh yeah, there's 3,000 people that want to come to a game. Okay, but what about when the team's lost 2 in a row? What about on a Wednesday night? What about when it's raining outside? So I think it's really focused groups to have a different outlook on everything. And as they come in, and then for those that are in, what are some other ways that you can bring in revenue? If you can't have fans, or even now that you can have fans in your building, in your stadium, can you maintain some of those resources and some of those revenue streams that just add to it? Because there's never enough of that to go around. So I think it's done a couple of things, and as difficult as it has been, I think it's probably made a few groups take a deep breath before they jump in and really, really make sure they're ready. And I think that's probably been a positive, if you can have a positive, in a pandemic, at least with this topic.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that. I mean, go ahead, Cindy. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I think for the NWSL, that pandemic, there was already teams coming in. So we talked about Angel City. There was mention about NWSL teams coming in, but I think the NWSL had to rely more on its sponsorships. And so it gained Budweiser as a sponsor, for the NWSL to continue to be relevant and to continue going, because it is such a young league, and we have seen women's the women's professional leagues, many of them before the NWSL just full. WPS was one of them, and so the NWSL really had to really seek out those sponsorships. Otherwise, on its own, I don't think it would continue, especially as it tried to also gain independence from U.S. Soccer being its financial backer. So, like I said, Budweiser was a big one that they gained, and that's been huge for the league.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add to Jeremy's point. I mean, with teams pausing, I actually applaud a lot of the ownership groups for taking a pause, because, I mean, the topic of this discussion today is how do you grieve a soccer team? I can imagine that if there's teams that wouldn't have taken a pause and came out of the gates to start their first games in March of 2020, would have had a very challenging time and maybe wouldn't have lasted, through, the course of the last 18 months, so I do applaud those ownership groups, that took a real professional approach and maybe said, okay, we need to hold on for a second and go ahead and launch this thing a year later and really get their feet underneath themselves. So, because I think we could have been in a worse situation, but it still wasn't easy for anybody, I mean, Major League Soccer, obviously, some deep pockets, but it hurts, and I think about the minor league teams that I've been playing for. I couldn't imagine if I was running a minor league soccer team, during that pandemic. I mean, it was enough for us to get through a payroll at the end of the month and, applaud ourselves on the back and then look at ourselves and go, all right, we have another one in 2 weeks. How are we going to get there? And if we couldn't count on any ticket revenue, I'm not quite sure how we would have done it, So certainly a challenge over the last 18 months for anybody.
Yeah, so this topic is grieving teams, but Cindy, you mentioned we've, in women's soccer, we've grieved whole leagues. Do you think that NWSL is sort of uniquely positioned to be able to get past sort of the challenges of professional women's soccer in the past, or where do you think it needs to go in order to be able to do that?
Yeah, I think so. And if you've looked at the past few months, a lot of it has to do with ownerships, and that's a whole nother topic of coaching issues and sexual harassment, and it's just it's at a point where it does need to reconfigure all of that, and a lot of it is on the ownership, and I think a lot of responsibility is on the ownerships to get beyond that, and so a lot of accountability. So I do think the NWSL is in a really good position because it is growing. The ownership group in LA, the San Diego, and even here in Kansas City, where nobody thought, I didn't think that Kansas City would have another NWSL team because FC Kansas City folded. And so it is growing, but I think a lot of it is just becoming a lot of front office issues that it needs to figure out. And a lot of it has to do with accountability and responsibility. So whole different topic, but it matters because more players are coming out and speaking about the abuse issues going on within their clubs, and it's disturbing, but needed for there to be accountability.
And do you feel like that when you get this accountability, it'll make the league stronger overall? Like, do you see an effect on whether? Will it make the teams that are there that are doing the right thing more likely to succeed and can continue?
Yes, and I think because a lot of that power is going now to the players, the NWSL players, and they're the ones that need to have the power to speak up and do it in a way that is safe, and that they know that they're going to get results, and it's not just going to be swept under the rug and you move on. Like, a lot of it is on the front office to take responsibility for player reports, and so I think it's from that aspect where the NWSL players are gaining that power to speak up, and for front office to believe them, and also the fans being behind them, and people not to hush things up, and that is needed.
I think you're sharing that
I would
perspective. So go ahead, Jeremy.
Yeah, sorry. So I would just add too, I think the difficulties that the NWSL has had, whether it's teams coming, teams going, Sacramento thought they were going to have an MLS and an NWSL team, but then that didn't occur, and now they're in San Diego. But I think the other thing that the challenges that have been occurring over the last 12 to 18 months with that is, as difficult as it is, I think it's forcing, and I think it's really putting a spotlight on these lower level clubs that are now adding, whether it's USL clubs that are adding W League teams, and that whole league is now growing. A club like us, so our women's team left in 2018 when the USL group came in town. They went across the street, as we like to say, over with them. So our fans were grieving not having a women's team for the last 3 seasons. So that's been difficult, and they're coming back. But everything that's occurred that Cindy just spoke about is really forcing us, not just on the business side, but on the operations side, to make sure we do it right, and to make sure we have reporting procedures, to make sure that we are more thorough with every hire that we're doing on our technical staff. And it's an amateur team for us, so it's going to be based on college players. But I think, for too often it was like, oh, you have a men's team? Well, you already have a stadium. You already have a staff. Let's, if you want to do a women's team, great. And there'll be some revenue and there'll be some expenses. But I think what is really, the last 12 months is doing that. Those that are going to take that step, whether it's an amateur team or if lower league professional women's soccer starts to gain traction here, as the USL is talking about, and some others, then I think it's really forcing the clubs that are taking that step, whether they have a men's team or not, to look even more that they're truly prepared. Because you can be prepared financially, which is mainly what we've spoken about. I haven't had to put plane tickets on my personal card as Djorn to get a team on a trip, but we've all done things to support clubs at certain times when things are difficult. But so I think it's making sure the business side's buttoned up, but then making sure the culture of your front office and your organization is truly able to support that as well. Because if not, you have another team that's disappearing, and doesn't matter if it's a men's team that's leaving or a women's team, it still hurts equally. And so I think being prepared and learning some of these lessons is allowing all facets of teams to be really able to hit the marketplace with their, taking off and running with it.
Yeah, you talked about the fan experience. I think we should get into that in each of your situations, right? Because there's a group, I think it's St. Louis, there's a group that became an MLS group. But I mean, there are people who have put a lot of time and effort and heart and soul into all the things that fans do on game day that suddenly don't have a club. So, can y'all share your experience, with those people during the good times and the bad times, and kind of what that means to the community?
Yeah, I think, again, specifically in St. Louis, so the St. Louigans supporters group there, they were around before St. Louis FC came in. So one of the first meetings I ever had was sitting at the International Tap House with the 2 quasi leaders. No supporters group really has leaders, as they like to say, but these 2 were, pretty vocal and out there, and sat down with them and said, look, you guys and what you've done is really, really important. It wasn't even an NASL team. It was the 1 year, Djorn, you'll remember, where the Federation ran a Division II league, USSF D2 or whatever they called it. And AC St. Louis was in there, and it was a one and done. And in fact, the women's team didn't even make it through that full year. So, these supporters had been burned, so to speak, and had lost the team before. But what they did between that drop off and then when St. Louis FC started was they supported local amateur soccer. They found more ways to get involved in the community. But I met with them and said, look, if this is going to be successful, we're going to need you guys in the corner, waving the flag, supporting us in the community, just bringing the whole game day experience. Because at that time, in my opinion, is when supporter culture at the lower levels really started to take off. Obviously it had been in different phases at the MLS level, but really started to come into play. So they had already kind of gone through it once, losing their team. And so I think when things started to go down that path with St. Louis FC, they were prepared for it. So this past year, they've continued to stay heavily involved with their charity work. They've added other groups within their supporter group that have interest in different things. And, while they took heat on social media for jumping across the street with the MLS group that came in that killed St. Louis FC, there's just a lot of common ties and things there amongst leadership and amongst just the culture of what they're trying to do in the community. So they've had to be creative and support different things over the last year. But I think in doing that, I think it's kind of eased a little bit of the pain of not having a team there for a year. But it hurts, and it's really difficult when you're not there to be a part of it and help people navigate through it. You're doing it via text message or phone calls. But seeing what happens to fans and supporters It's tough. It's really, really tough when that's gone, because especially at the lower levels where, players are accessible, and, they're accessible in the community. You see them at the grocery store, they know supporters by name, and it makes it really, really hard when it's a big part of the community that way. So it's been a challenge in St. Louis. It's good to see them have something to point to now in 22 with the 2 team, and then moving forward into 23. But it is not an easy thing to go through, and I don't wish it upon any group that really does so much to support the clubs they're around. When that team goes away, it's hard.
And I'll add to that. I mean, I think it's anytime a soccer team leaves, I mean, it's incredibly sad, and the fans are grieving, the supporters are grieving. But what I've always been encouraged by, whether it's in St. Louis or in Austin or Minnesota, that supporters group has also turned that, grieving into energy, right? And still creating, when you don't have a professional soccer team, still creating get-togethers and meetups and watch parties, right? And I think that is all important, because a new ownership group that is interested in, potentially looking at a market, whether it's Austin, and Eberle's Army, kind of turned into Austin Anthem, and they were still doing things for several years. And it was the pre-courts and really that Columbus group that came in and met with those individuals to keep that energy alive, right? And go, oh, there's actually support here, for a professional soccer team. So I think, a lot of times that grieving can be turned into positive energy to keep the momentum going, and hopefully, court a new group to come in, and reinvest in professional soccer in the market. And I think that's been a positive that has come out of, these things. If there is one, is just that supporters group, even becoming maybe even more organized and doing everything they can to get professional soccer back. And I think that's been key in a lot of these markets to get the game back in their backyard.
I'll add to, from the NWSL perspective, the FC Kansas City Blue Crew, which supported FC Kansas City, we do see the devastation. It's a shock to see somebody lose their soccer team. It's not. I mean, from a media perspective, you're like, oh, I have to cover this, and then you watch the fans just be devastated because it wasn't expected, and it's something that they held on to. But I think the Blue Crew, even as the team moved, or the players did move to Utah, they still continue to support many of those players. And I think even seeing that from the Utah perspective, where they also unexpectedly lost their team, moving back to Kansas City, most of those players moving back to Kansas City, that support continues even from afar. And so, as devastating as it is, it's still really just cool to see like the fans continue to be supportive of these individual players. Because yeah, they do become a part of the community. Like it was said, I mean, Utah has a great soccer culture, and these players did embrace the community and got involved with many of the nonprofit organizations too. And so they do matter when these players like have to relocate too. And I think like fans do see that, and they do experience the same heartbreak that probably some of the players do, because they're also losing the community they've embraced. And so but I have seen that there is that support that continues even to another city.
Yeah, I think the community is like bigger than the fans, and I think for those of y'all that have been involved in running teams, like you've probably had to tell nonprofits and other groups like, gosh, things didn't work, leave town. Like how did those conversations happen? Or that seems like that would be uniquely difficult that somebody, because everybody's so philanthropic in soccer. I think that's one of those things I've learned that connection gets lost sometimes. Do you have any stories maybe about times when that's happened?
Well, I mean, I think back a little bit to when, I was in Minnesota and had been there for 6 years, and we had a great relationship with the Minnesota Youth Soccer Association. Right. And I remember having to have conversations, about, things were bleak, but again, I think there's a few things that, got us through. I mean, like I mentioned, I went to Austin for a year, and then they moved, and I was kind of fledgling and trying to figure out what I was going to do next. And I got a phone call from the NASL in, early 2010 and early 2011, that the league NASL had taken back over Minnesota, right? Because they needed to have at least 8 teams to make a D2 NASL league. But the goal was, hey, for 2 years, we're going to support this team and try to find an ownership group. So it was a unique experience for me because, I never felt good about how I left Minnesota and how things had gone, in the end of 2009 with, a struggling ownership group and not sure what was going to happen to the team. And it was kind of a little bit of a personal mission for me to go back there. And I tell people it was a little bit like fixing up a house. You buy kind of a clunker house and you put a new roof on it and, new shutters and, completely, do the inside. We got lucky enough that in that first year, we kind of won the best yard on the block prize by winning the league championship, as a league-owned team. And I think that really perked up a bunch of eyes. And we got lucky enough, that after that second season in 2012, Dr. Bill McGuire, who is now the owner of Minnesota United FC, we caught his eye, and he had real conversations, and we were able to, as a group, as a team, as a front office of 4 people, I think we were able to save that team because it was going to go away. If there wasn't going to be an owner, that was going to be it. We got lucky enough that, we found Dr. Bill McGuire, and you just look at what's happened. So I think I throw that out there because I think, for people that are grieving the loss of soccer teams, there is hope too, that the fan support is still going to be there. The fans of Minnesota United FC are still called the Dark Clouds. That's related back to the Thunder days, right? Dark Clouds has nothing to do with Minnesota United FC, but they've kept the name just because that was always the consistency, was the fan group, right? Through all the ups and downs of the professional soccer in that market, it was always the Dark Clouds that were consistent, and I think that it really carried them through. So there is hope, in situations like this. And again, to my point, I think there's an energy there that can come from losing your team to doing everything you can to get one back. And I think that's something really positive that can come out of it and come back even stronger, obviously, like they have, in Minnesota, in Austin, in other markets as well.
Jeremy, you want to add to that at all?
Yeah. I was gonna say I don't know if lucky is a word or fortunate, but when it all went down, I wasn't in St. Louis, so most of my conversations, when people were like starting to hear a little bit, I guess before it got reported that this was probably going to be the last season, and it was during a pandemic where games were closed doors, so there was already that feeling in St. Louis, like our club is almost gone because we can't watch them play. And now there's rumors that this might be the last season. And, eventually things opened up and fans were able to go for a few matches and see them play. So being distant while that was going on made it even more difficult because you weren't there to console people and, to buy somebody a beer and to talk them through and say, hey, look, you guys have been through this before, and your club culture, and it wasn't just supporters group people that were reaching out. It was former employees that were now placed at other teams. Like, man, can you believe this is done? This is going away. And so those are just tough conversations for me. That really sums up how, even if I'd say most people understand how difficult this is, and the reason when a team goes away. And the reason I say that is when it officially came out that St. Louis FC was gone, had a couple people here locally in Chattanooga, a couple corporate partners, a couple just friends, and a couple people from the supporters group here that reached out and were like, hey man, I'm sure today was tough, just want thinking about you. And that just shows that I think even if you're not there and it's not your club that goes away, that you feel, as Cindy said, that pain and what it leads to. But from there it just grows and evolves, and now they're on to something else, and I don't know if it'll be something better. Time will tell, but that city's on to something different. But it's hard, and it's even more difficult when you're not there to kind of be a part of it going away, because you're just not there to have those conversations. Because so much of this job and this business, whether you're reporting or you're working in the front office, is relationships and communication and being able to visit with people. And when you're not there to do that in person, man, it makes it tough. I'll never forget just sitting on my couch and my phone just blowing up, like, is this really real? And I'm like, yeah, I guess so. That's the word on the street. And then trying to, just talk people through it and help where you can too. That's the other thing is when these teams go away, it's not just the fans and supporters, but players need new jobs because some of them might have had a multi-year deal or an option. Your front office staff, your people that take tickets, your game day staff. There's a lot of people that are out of work, and so you're trying to place them and help them as much as you can. So there's just a ton that goes into it, and it's it's challenging.
Yeah, I think you all are in situations where you kind of. I think Cindy, maybe we'll start with you on this one, but like, there's a point where you see the writing on the wall and nothing's official, and you've got all these people affected by it, and I'm interested in sort of the stories of those people and like how they carry through like the last year or the last whatever until it's like this news becomes official and it's kind of final, because it seems like it would be a little bit hollow to do some of that work.
You're talking to me, right?
Yes.
Okay, yeah.
Yes.
Sorry.
Yeah. In Kansas City, when people knew that they were going to Utah, like how did the pop react?
Yeah, and I think there's like you said, there's these rumors, there's these rumblings that the team's gonna, you know, fold, and with Kansas City, the first go around, like that was ownership trouble. I don't think I touched on that, but that was due because the owner was just not taking care of its team, and the NWSL stepped in, and so they go. So there was that rumbling, and so, but with Kansas City, like none of the, I mean, nobody went except for the players. Nobody else in the front office went to Utah because the RSL front office took over Utah. Um, I'm sorry, took over the NWSL team there, and they were starting fresh over. So, and that sort of happened also with the Utah front office, where they also did not go because it was a whole new ownership taking over. So it wasn't like an easy transplant for them either. It was just the players got to go, and I mean, not even all of them are also. That's just the thing. Like Jeremy mentioned, like a lot of them, there's this. Are they going to get to go because there's that contract situation, and it's just it's complicated because it does affect so many people, and even as like it's happening and you're hearing that this is going on, and the people that are affected are those who work behind the scenes too, and so not as the rumblings are going on, that the people are going to be affected severely by this move, especially when it's not just a easy relocation for them. Like it affects them tremendously, and so it's hard because you're talking to them and you're wanting to get like confirmation of like, is this really happening, and can you give a statement, and behind that phone call, it's like this individual is about to just lose their position. So it's hard. Yeah.
Either you gentlemen want to add to that? I think you've had some experience with it too. Oh, I can't hear you, Djorn.
Sorry, that was my fault. It's been a little all over the board. I've been lucky enough, to work with some great people that, at the end of the original version of the Minnesota Thunder, we stuck it out till the end, paycheck or no paycheck. The group was there, and some of those people, I mean, they cared so much about the team that they wanted to stick it through and do the right thing. I've been a big fan of, any time in my career trying to leave well. If I'm going to leave, I want to make sure it's done well and not just walk out the door. And I think a lot of our staff did that in all of the different situations. And some of them, are now working for Minnesota United, and have been there for, 6 years of their Major League Soccer careers. In Austin, the first go around is maybe a little bit different. The ownership group, I mean, to be honest, I was the CEO of the team, and I found out the team was moving via a press conference that I was watching live on the internet, and they took some of the people and didn't take others, and that's the ownership's choice, so I think it's all over the board, but I've been lucky enough, to work with, really good people that, are in it for their personal well-being, but also care enough about the team to make sure that if things are going to end, that they're going to end well.
Jeremy, I'm going to give you a shot to weigh in on this if you want.
No, I'm good. Yeah, I think rumors are a big part of working in this business, whether it's, as Djorn said a while back, it was, is this league going to make it? Is that league going to make it? What's going to happen? And then it drifts into clubs, and it's unfortunate that that's how a lot of people find out, and it just goes back again, when you're lucky enough to work with good people, even when you work with good people, sometimes things still go bad, but at least hopefully you're treated well, and on the way out as things go down. And I think that happened in St. Louis. I think the only disappointing thing that I would throw in there is that I do think the overall hurt and experience did sway a few people not to work in sports anymore. And I think that's disappointing. I think it was just not that they were burned, but I think the emotional toll was just hard. Something was taken away that they helped build and had so much fun with, and the connections they made. It was difficult. There's a couple that I frankly have tried to get to come here and work for us about a year ago, and they're just kind of done with sports. The whole thing, kind of, turned them off a little bit, and that's unfortunate, but that's part of life a little bit too.
Yeah, I think like any industry, it's the same people that kind of move around from spot to spot to spot, which I guess is probably a good reason to make sure that you end things well. When you do that, are there people y'all have worked with in multiple places?
Yeah. I mean, I would say yes. I think a big reason, why I got lucky enough to be the executive director of the Hall of Fame was, a gentleman that was, pretty high up at U.S. Soccer, because the Hall of Fame is ultimately owned by U.S. Soccer. I used to rent field boards from him at TGI back in the early 2000s, So yeah, there's relationships like that that I think are key. And I think, leaving well and doing the right thing is going to suit anybody well, in this sport, whether you're a fan, a player, a front office. The sports world is small. In the professional soccer world, even though all of these teams coming in, is still incredibly small. So I think, even to Jeremy's point, even when things, do go south, whether they're out of your control or not, I do think it's important to walk out with your head held high and make sure things are in as good of a spot as they can be when you walk out, because you never know when somebody's going to look at that when your next opportunity arises.
Yeah, only connection
So
I've
what?
had from place to sorry, only connection I've had
No, go
place
ahead,
to
Jeremy.
place has been more on the player front. So this cardboard cutout is a former St. Louis player who was here right before the pandemic hit with us, and so it's about the relationships. And I think players, sometimes in some places hear things first when things are going down. So you always want to make sure that those relationships stay strong, because at some point you're going to be in a situation where it could help them, whether it's maybe not them as a player, but maybe their younger brother, or maybe somebody they grew up playing with or played with in another team, and they just want to know, hey, thinking about this club, how did they treat, how were you treated by that person when you were there before? So just crossover for me personally on the player front a little bit.
Well, that cardboard cutout kind of led me to my question. One of the things that was in the opening was memorabilia. I'm interested, like, have y'all collected things from place to place, and do you have a favorite item of a club that's long gone, maybe, that you want to talk a little bit about?
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I mean, in the National Soccer Hall of Fame, I mean, that's part of our business, right? So I've donated some things, that I have collected over the years, but one of the things that we have inside of here, because I wanted to make sure I get my hands on it, is the NASL Soccer Bowl, from the years that the reboot of the NASL was up, and I was able to get my hands on it, and it sits here in the trophy case. It's a little piece of history that I think is important. Lucky enough that the NSC Minnesota Stars are the first team were ever on that. But whether it's scarves, I still wear some Minnesota Thunder gear around that I've got in my closet. So yeah, I certainly have kept things from over the years, and then in the position that I am, I've donated some of them to the Hall of Fame just because I think they deserve to be here and not in my closet.
Yeah, definitely, the jerseys, the hats. I think for me, being on the field on a photography, sometimes on photography, I have photos of, players who've asked me to take photos of them with their family members, and that's in your digital files because you're like, I was there. I was there when a player asked me to take a photo with her dad, because it's a special moment. She's back on the field, and it's a very personal moment, and so that's really cool to have those that photo of this player.
Yeah, similar. Got a box in the garage and probably a box in the home office with things, little like silly little things like the first ever, we were building the brand in 2014 during the summer at the World Cup, like, watch parties and people trying to explain to people what USL was and where we were going to play and all that. Just little, giveaways, little bottle openers, just little things like that. Of course, the jerseys and the scarves too. But sometimes it's the little silly things that, I have when we announced, we had two logos that the fans were able to vote on and supporters when we rolled out, and we did a launch party, which one we were going to choose. And there's this little blue cup, and the joke was that eventually the brand, the more you put in the dishwasher, the brand wore off. So that was the joke amongst the supporters group was, well, eventually that brand's going to go away. And well, it did, but I still have that. And, so I think of Cody, who was, a supporter that was so happy to get this cup at this little brand launch that we did at this bar, and just things like that, trigger more memories than anything else, I think, for sure.
Yeah, I've noticed a couple things on those fronts in Austin. One is like anybody that has the MLS 2 ATX scarves that were out before the team ever existed, are kind of like OG Austin FC fans. And I noticed, I think it was in one of the photos from Austin FC promotional things for the jersey that Mateo Clark was in an Austin Bold, the supporters group like cap in the Austin FC deal, because I think that is an important sort of everybody's experience and memory and shared community, and I think it'll be great for the Austin soccer community to have something to rally behind. We're almost out of time, I guess. Is there anything that y'all wanted to talk about, you're expecting to talk about today that we didn't get into? Or just any closing thoughts kind of on this whole experience that you've had that you can share with folks who are watching?
Yeah, I'll jump in. Hopefully, in 5-10 years, this isn't a topic, right? Hopefully, the game and our country has grown enough and is strong enough where this doesn't occur. I think the more that, is what we saw, what happened in Columbus and what has happened other places. And honestly, one of the things that attracted me to come here was, this group started as an NPSL amateur club, a bunch of, guys sitting around a kitchen table trying to figure out if they could do this. And one of their big things was, if we can sell shares in our club, meaningful shares that have equity, that'll ensure that we'll never be threatened to leave because we didn't get the stadium deal we wanted, or somebody wanted the brand and was going to move it down the street. So I think the more that those things come about, and obviously at some levels it'll never come about. I don't see anytime soon MLS is going to sell shares in their club like the Green Bay Packers and others have. But I think the more that, teams can truly be tied in, and whether that's a stadium project like what's happened in Kansas City, I think it would be very difficult, for that club to ever move after pulling off that really exciting separate stadium project away from Sporting Kansas City. So the more they can get really deep in the community financially, and there's more things, and you can leave a stadium, right? It happens all the time. I mean, you can just close the doors and move down the street, but the more there's things around those stadiums and the more the clubs are invested in those stadiums themselves, and local ownership, I think hopefully this is not a topic that people are discussing in 5 to 10 years. But in the meantime, if it does happen, just, I think the other thing is reach out to groups that have gone through it, whether it's the group in Austin or St. Louis, and, there's a group in Reno recently, but, name a big city and soccer has gone away from it. So if people are struggling with that, reach out to, receive some help and some insight from those that have gone through it. But hopefully this topic is dwindling away at some point.
Yeah,
And I
and
think
I'll
the right.
second that. Go ahead,
Go
Cindy.
ahead. Okay, sorry.
And I was
I
just
think
going to
we
say,
speak at the same time. Yeah. I think the right owner too is very important from the NWSL perspective, because it's, I mean, it's reaching, the NWSL is reaching 10 years, but it's still fairly young. And I mean, people would tell me who have been around longer covering soccer, like MLS went through the same trouble of like, is this league gonna stick around? Is this league gonna stay? And it has, and it took a while for it to gain some stability. And I think finally with the NWSL, I think it's finally reaching that point because you are having those owners who are making the right investments, like the Kansas City group, like that stadium is huge because it's the very very first NWSL specific stadium, and so that trend has got to keep going. And the right ownership group, whether it's multiple, groups owned by celebrities like in LA, and it's the right owner matters. And even just like players being vocal about their owners too happen. And we just saw that with the Spirit too, where they also just got a new owner because there was a lot of backing from the players to, wrestle, kind of wrestle that ownership away. And so right owners matter as the league continues to grow um, for the women's sport.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. Right owners do matter, and just we're going to see this less and less. As I mentioned earlier, as things become more professional and the right ownerships are coming out. But I think for anybody watching this, look at Jeremy's point. Reach if your team is on the brink of going away. It is devastating. It's sad, but I think it is also an opportunity for you, as a supporter group, to really take a hard look at your market, at your team, at your supporters group, and how do we reinvigorate this thing? Because there's somebody out there that is interested in getting involved in professional soccer, and trying to find the right market to do it. And you as a fan base, as a supporter group, can be a huge piece in that, in rallying the right ownership group to come in and ensure that you've got professional soccer in your market for the long term. We never want to see it go away. It could go away because you don't have the right ownership, right? I think that's also an opportunity. How do we as a fan base, show somebody that is going to be the right owner, that we're here for the long haul, we're here for to support you, and you need to come and put professional soccer back in our back door. So it's terrible. It can be a grieving moment, but I think it can be something positive as well.
All right. Well, I think we're about at time. So I appreciate y'all sharing with the audience. Hopefully people got some words of comfort there. I think check out the National Soccer Hall of Fame, I believe, is probably a plug that we should put in there. When you're in Frisco, check out Cindy's work here. And which site?
The Blue Testament.
The Blue Testament. And Jeremy, I guess the next time you're in Chattanooga, stop by and check out the club. Is that your ask for folks that are around?
Absolutely. Swing on by. We'll take care of you.
All right. Thanks a lot, y'all. And we are about done with this panel. So thank you for your time and appreciate everybody watching. And be sure to check out the Striker Texas for all the news it's fit to print and talk about and tweet and all those things related to soccer in the state of Texas and beyond.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.